AM 800, I'm Rusty Thompson. Well, it's a term that most people in Windsor-Essex are familiar with, an environmental assessment. Given all the major construction projects in this area, specifically the construction of a new bridge linking Windsor and Detroit, an environmental assessment, of course, looks at the possible impact, positive or negative, that a proposed project may have on the environment, together consisting of the natural, social, and economic aspects. Well, a construction group in the province is sounding the alarm bell over the time and money that's wasted through the environmental assessment process right across Ontario. A study released today shows that EAs delay municipal infrastructure projects by an average of 20 months, which in turn stalls job creation and growth. The report was released by the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. Joining us now to discuss more is Executive Director Andy Monahan. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks, Rusty.
First off, what are the big impacts you're seeing according to the studies that you commissioned?
Well, the study that just came out today said that there's about $232 million in extra project costs per year for really basic infrastructure projects across Ontario. These are technically called Municipal Class EA projects. And from a construction industry point of view, we were very surprised to see that was holding back about 10,000 jobs across the province, or what the report author said is 10,000 full-time equivalent jobs per year.
So when you look at this from a standpoint of being involved in the construction industry and you hear this number, these figures, what's your immediate reaction?
Well, it's one of a little bit of shock, I must say. Although not complete shock or surprise. We did release a report about a year ago that also advocated for environmental assessment reform, but it was a very broad-based picture of it, and this one actually delved down and looked at 99 specific Municipal Class EA projects that were done in Ontario over the last 5 years. And it came up with this figure, as you mentioned, close to 20 months delay. The interesting thing, Rusty, is that Ontario is the only province that has environmental assessments for these basic infrastructure projects. No other province has the same level of oversight. So I'm not saying that, for example, you mentioned at the top that the bridge to the U.S. Was going through an EA. We're not talking about that kind of a project. We're talking about basic road widenings or intersection improvements. Could be something as simple as a roadside park or picnic area. And a lot of the examples that came up in this report suggested that you're adding hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes, or even more, on some of these really simple projects.
And now this report has come out with a number of recommendations that your group would like to see possibly, the changes made to make this system a little more streamlined. What are some of the top recommendations?
Well, one of the things that we looked at that the province brought in 2 years ago was a streamlined transit environmental assessment. And that particular one recognized that transit and various transportation projects are essentially good for the environment. They get people out of cars. And we thought that some of these basic infrastructure projects could go under a similar process where you don't have to look at a range of alternatives. Let's focus on the project and what are the best measures of environmental mitigation.
How much do you think politics plays into some of the delays?
Well, the system is actually run jointly by the Ministry of the Environment and the Municipal Engineers Association. So, there's obviously municipal politicians that want to do the right thing, and obviously, you look at everything, that needs to be done, as you mentioned, social, environmental, and so forth, and there's lots of public consultation. What is listed in this report, however, though, is that when the EA legislation was brought in the 1970s, a lot of the planning legislation did not incorporate the environment, but now we've got much more environmental criteria that are actually incorporated into planning. So what happens is the public goes to consultation meetings for planning issues, things get approved, like a new subdivision, and then people who don't want that development to occur then use the environmental assessment process and bump up, they call it, to the Minister of the Environment to try to delay it. And it's a very long and arduous process, and typically the minister signs and says, we've already gone through this, there's no real negative impacts, I approve it. But in the meantime, you've lost 19 months on average, or 20.
When you look at something like this, and given that politics is involved, there is a process that needs to be followed, can a healthy balance be found?
I think it can, and this is very interesting. I wasn't aware that this was going to happen, but I just found out this afternoon that the McGuinty government is seeking input on obtaining environmental approvals in a faster way, and he's looking for public comment by April the 2nd. He's saying it's a new model that's going to be introduced over the next 2 years and focus resources on the activity that pose the greatest risk to human health and the environment. So I think he would be very supportive of this paper because these types of projects are really basic in terms of a bridge replacement, something that might not meet today's safety standards, but let's replace the bridge and keep it in exactly the same location it is. I think most members of the public wouldn't be opposed to that.
If the changes that you would like to see happen were made, how much of an impact do you think this would be for the residential and civil construction association for your members? How much of a kickstart would it be for them?
Well, I think it would be terrific in terms of jobs for the construction industry, but probably just as importantly, or more importantly, for the public. It would minimize all that public consultation process that I referred to. I think, so saving time is really important, but also saving valuable resources. And I guess I wanted to add as well that a lot of municipalities, when the federal and provincial economic stimulus funding was announced last year, did not put forward their top priority projects that would have been, let's call them, these basic Municipal Class EA projects, because they knew the process took so long. So in a lot of cases, and I'll just use one example, let's put lighting in public parks. It's probably a good project, but it's not the one that's going to bring the most jobs in terms of economic stimulus.
Yeah, you just answered my next question, because it's got to be, when you look at this, that on an average, 20 months that it could stall a project for these environmental assessments, and you're saying the small one, it's got to be a major deterrent for some, some of the decision makers.
Yeah, and I think there is some light at the end of the tunnel on this one. Certainly John Baird, federal infrastructure minister, and here in Queen's Park, they have been recognizing that there's often duplication between provincial and federal EA processes. So they've been trying to work out some arrangement where if one agency, whether it be provincial or federal, does the EA, then the other one can kind of back off and say, you've met all the criteria that we need to look at.
We really appreciate your insights. Obviously, this is a major issue for the province, both in terms of protecting the environment and job creation. So it's going to be interesting to follow and see where this goes.
I think so.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
That's Executive Director Andy Monahan with the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. We're coming up on 5:27 here on the afternoon news on AM 800.